What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down for what should be a simple interview, only to find himself blindsided by a host who thinks fame gives her permission to cross every line? In just 36 seconds, a single comment turned a friendly conversation into the most shocking moment in daytime television history. Samuel L. Jackson arrived at the studio on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning. He was there to talk about his latest film, a project he had poured months of work into. The audience was buzzing with excitement. They knew they were about to see one of the greatest actors of all time. Samuel walked onto the stage with his signature cool confidence, waving to the crowd as they erupted in applause. Kelly Clarkson greeted him with her trademark smile, the kind that had made her a household name. The two sat down across from each other, and for the first few minutes, everything went smoothly. They talked about his career, his family, and the incredible journey that had taken him from humble beginnings to international stardom. Samuel was relaxed, funny, and engaging. The audience loved every second of it. But then, something shifted. Kelly leaned back in her chair, a strange look crossing her face. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but Samuel caught it. There was an edge to her expression, something almost smug. She took a sip of water from her mug, set it down slowly, and then looked directly at him. "So Samuel," she began, her voice taking on a tone that was just a little too casual, "I have to ask you something. Everyone knows you've done a lot of action movies, a lot of tough guy roles, but don't you think at your age, maybe it's time to slow down a bit? I mean, you're not exactly a spring chicken anymore." The studio went quiet. The audience, which had been laughing and clapping just moments before, suddenly fell silent. You could hear people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Samuel's smile faded. He stared at Kelly, his eyes narrowing slightly. He knew what she was doing. This wasn't a genuine question. This was a dig, a disrespectful jab disguised as concern. He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "Well, Kelly," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I don't know what you mean by that. I'm in great shape. I work hard to stay fit. I train every day. Age is just a number, and I've still got a lot to offer." Kelly laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. It was sharp, almost mocking. "Oh, come on," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm just saying, maybe you should leave the action stuff to the younger guys. You know, before you hurt yourself or something. I mean, nobody wants to see you struggling to keep up." The audience gasped. Some people covered their mouths in shock. Others looked around nervously, unsure of how to react. This wasn't playful banter. This was Kelly Clarkson, on her own show, insulting one of the most beloved actors in the world, and she was doing it with a smile on her face, as if she thought she was being clever. Samuel's jaw tightened. He sat up straighter in his chair, his entire demeanor changing. The friendly, relaxed guest was gone. In his place was a man who had just been disrespected in front of millions of people, and he wasn't going to let it slide. "Before I hurt myself," Samuel repeated slowly, his voice low and measured. "Kelly, with all due respect, I don't think you understand what it takes to do what I do. I've been in this industry for decades. I've worked harder than most people can imagine. And I'm still here, still working, still doing the things I love, because I earn it every single day." Kelly's smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the armrests of her chair. "I'm just trying to have a conversation here," she said, her tone turning defensive. "I didn't mean to offend you. I just think it's a valid point. You've had an amazing career, but maybe it's time to accept that you can't do everything you used to do." Samuel shook his head slowly. "No," he said firmly, "that's not a valid point. That's you making assumptions about me based on your own narrow view of what someone my age should or shouldn't be doing. You don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of. And frankly, it's disrespectful for you to sit here and tell me what I can or can't do with my career." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Kelly's producers were frantically signaling from the side of the stage, trying to get her to move on to another topic, but she wasn't paying attention. She was locked in now, her pride wounded by Samuel's pushback. "Well," Kelly said, her voice rising slightly, "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You're not 25 anymore, Samuel. You're not even 40. And I think people would respect you more if you admitted that instead of trying to act like you're still in your prime." That was it. That was the line Kelly shouldn't have crossed. The audience let out another collective gasp, louder this time. Some people even booed. Samuel sat there for a long moment, staring at Kelly with an expression that could only be described as disbelief mixed with anger. He looked down at the floor, then back up at her, and slowly shook his head. "You know what, Kelly?" Samuel said, his voice quiet but deadly serious. "I came here today to talk about my work, to connect with your audience, and to have a respectful conversation. But you've made it very clear that you don't respect me. You don't respect what I do, and you don't respect the effort I put into my craft. So I'm done here." Kelly's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this. "Wait, what?" she stammered. "Samuel, come on, don't be so sensitive. I was just joking around." Samuel stood up, pulling off the small microphone that had been clipped to his shirt. He handed it to a nearby crew member, never breaking eye contact with Kelly. "Joking? Around?" he said, his voice dripping with incredulity. "Kelly, there's a difference between joking and being insulting. What you said wasn't funny, it was rude, and I don't have to sit here and take it." Kelly scrambled to recover, her face flushing red. She stood up as well, reaching out toward Samuel as if to stop him. "Samuel, please, let's talk about this," she pleaded. "I didn't mean for it to come across that way. Can we just start over?" But Samuel was already walking away. He headed toward the side of the stage, his shoulders squared, his head held high. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's biggest stars walked off the set of the Kelly Clarkson show, leaving Kelly standing there alone, her mouth hanging open. The crew didn't know what to do. Cameras kept rolling, capturing every excruciating second of the fallout. Kelly turned back to face the audience, her expression a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and anger. She tried to laugh it off, throwing her hands up in the air. "Well," she said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace, "I guess Samuel didn't appreciate my sense of humor. That's too bad. But hey, the show must go on, right?" But the audience wasn't having it. A few people clapped half-heartedly, but most just sat there in awkward silence. Some were shaking their heads, others were whispering to each other, clearly on Samuel's side. Kelly had lost the room, and she knew it. Backstage, Samuel was already gathering his things. His team was with him, and they were just as upset as he was. One of his assistants asked if he wanted to make a statement, but Samuel shook his head. "No," he said simply. "What happened in there speaks for itself." Back on stage, Kelly was trying desperately to move on. She introduced the next segment, but her voice was shaky, her confidence completely shattered. The producers cut to a commercial break as quickly as they could, giving Kelly a moment to compose herself. But the damage was done. The entire exchange had been captured on camera, and everyone knew it would be everywhere within hours. During the commercial break, Kelly stood in the middle of the stage, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She looked frustrated, defensive. A producer approached her, trying to explain that they needed to salvage the rest of the show, but Kelly snapped at him. "I didn't do anything wrong," she insisted. "He's just being dramatic. I was making a joke. People need to lighten up." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. She had crossed a line, and everyone in that studio knew it. Samuel L. Jackson had every right to walk off that stage. He had been disrespected, belittled, and insulted on live television, and he had responded with dignity and strength. When the show came back from commercial, Kelly tried to act like nothing had happened. She smiled, joked with her band, and moved on to the next guest. But it was clear to everyone watching that something had fundamentally shifted. The energy was off, the audience was subdued, and Kelly, despite her best efforts, couldn't quite hide the embarrassment and anger simmering just beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Samuel L. Jackson left the building without looking back. He got into his car and drove away, leaving behind a situation that would soon become one of the most talked about moments in daytime television history. He didn't need to say anything more. His actions had spoken volumes. What makes this moment so significant is the stark contrast between the two people involved. On one side, you had Samuel L. Jackson, a man who has spent decades earning respect through talent, hard work, and professionalism. He's an actor who has never taken his success for granted, who continues to push himself to deliver incredible performances year after year. He's someone who understands the value of respect, both for himself and for others. On the other side, you had Kelly Clarkson, a host, who, in that moment, seemed to forget that having a popular show doesn't give you the right to belittle your guests. Her comments weren't playful or lighthearted. They were mean-spirited and unnecessary. She had taken a cheap shot at someone who deserved better, and when Samuel called her out on it, she tried to play the victim. The most telling part of the whole exchange was Kelly's reaction when Samuel stood up to leave. She didn't apologize sincerely. She didn't take responsibility for her words. Instead, she tried to dismiss his feelings, telling him he was being too sensitive, that she was just joking. But jokes are supposed to be funny, and there was nothing funny about what she said. It was insulting, plain and simple. Samuel's decision to walk off the show was not about being dramatic or making a scene. It was about self-respect. It was about refusing to sit there and be insulted for the sake of entertainment. He knew that by staying, he would be sending a message that it was okay for Kelly to treat him that way, and he wasn't willing to do that. The audience's reaction throughout the entire ordeal was also telling. When Kelly first made her comment about Samuel's age, the gasps and murmurs made it clear that people were uncomfortable. They knew it was inappropriate. And when Samuel walked off, many of them were openly supportive of his decision. They understood that he had every right to leave, and they respected him for it. This wasn't just a simple disagreement between a host and a guest. This was a moment that highlighted a much bigger issue in the entertainment industry. Too often, hosts and interviewers think that their platform gives them the right to say whatever they want, regardless of how it affects the people sitting across from them. They forget that their guests are human beings who deserve to be treated with respect, not props to be used for cheap laughs or dramatic moments. Samuel L. Jackson's walk-off was a reminder that no one, not even a beloved talk show host, gets to disrespect someone just because they're on television. It was a statement that respect is non-negotiable and that having a microphone and a camera doesn't give you a free pass to be rude. What makes Samuel's response particularly admirable is that he didn't lose his composure. He didn't yell or curse or make threats. He simply and calmly explained why Kelly's behavior was unacceptable, and then he left. It was a masterclass in maintaining dignity under pressure. He proved that you can stand up for yourself without stooping to someone else's level. The incident also shone a light on the power dynamics at play in these kinds of situations. Kelly, as the host, had the home field advantage. She had the audience, the crew, and the entire production behind her. Samuel was just a guest, there to promote his work. But despite that imbalance, Samuel didn't back down. He knew his worth, and he wasn't going to let Kelly's position of power intimidate him into accepting disrespect. The whole exchange, from Kelly's initial comment to Samuel's final exit, lasted only a few minutes. But in those few minutes, so much was revealed. It showed the difference between someone who has earned their place through hard work and humility, and someone who, in that moment at least, seemed to think their position gave them the right to belittle others. Looking back at the beginning of the interview, there were no signs that things would go so wrong. When Samuel first walked out, the energy was positive. Kelly seemed genuinely excited to have him there. She complimented his latest work, talked about how much she admired his career, and the conversation flowed naturally. Samuel was in his element, sharing stories from the set, talking about working with other talented actors, and connecting with the audience in that effortless way he always does. The audience was eating it up. They laughed at his jokes, applauded at all the right moments, and hung on his work. Every word. This was exactly what a talk show interview should be. It was entertaining, informative, and respectful. Samuel was giving them gold, sharing insights into his creative process, and offering behind-the-scenes glimpses into the making of his film. But then, Kelly decided to take the conversation in a different direction. Maybe she thought she was being edgy. Maybe she thought she was creating a memorable moment for her show. Whatever her reasoning, she chose to shift from celebrating Samuel's accomplishments to questioning his ability to continue doing what he loves. And that's where everything started to unravel. Samuel's initial response was measured and diplomatic. He could have gotten defensive right away, but he didn't. He answered honestly, explaining that he works hard to stay in shape and that age doesn't define what he's capable of. It was a perfectly reasonable response, one that should have allowed Kelly to gracefully move on to another topic. But she didn't take that opportunity. Instead, she doubled down. That laugh she gave, that dismissive wave of her hand, it all communicated a message of condescension. She wasn't listening to what Samuel was saying. She had already made up her mind about what she wanted to express, and she was going to say it regardless of how it made her guests feel. The suggestion that Samuel should leave action roles to younger actors was particularly offensive because it ignored everything he brings to his performances. Samuel L. Jackson isn't just doing action movies because he can still physically handle them. He's doing them because he's one of the best in the business. He brings depth, charisma, and gravitas to every role he takes on. When Kelly said that nobody wanted to see him struggling to keep up, she revealed her own biases and assumptions. She was projecting her limited view of what aging actors should be doing onto someone who has consistently defied those expectations. Samuel isn't struggling, he's thriving. And the success of his recent films proves that audiences absolutely do want to see him continuing to do what he does best. The moment when Samuel repeated her words back to her, "Before I hurt myself," was crucial. It forced her to hear how her comment actually sounded. But even then, even when given that opportunity to recognize her mistake and apologize, Kelly chose to defend her position instead. Samuel's explanation of what it takes to do what he does was important. He wasn't bragging or being defensive. He was simply stating facts. He has been in the industry for decades. He has worked incredibly hard. He continues to earn his place at the top of his profession every single day. When Samuel told her that she was making assumptions based on her own narrow view, he was hitting the nail on the head. Kelly was operating from a place of limited understanding. She was applying her own preconceptions about age and ability to someone whose career directly contradicts those preconceptions. Her next comment, suggesting that people would respect Samuel more if he admitted he wasn't in his prime, was the final straw. It was such a fundamentally disrespectful thing to say. She was essentially telling him that she knew better than he did about his own career, his own abilities, and his own worth. The audience's reaction to that comment was visceral. The loud gasps, the boos from some members of the crowd, all of it indicated that they understood the gravity of what Kelly had just said. They weren't on her side, they were on Samuel's side. Samuel's pause before responding was powerful. He wasn't rushing to react. He was taking a moment to process what had just happened and to decide how he wanted to handle it. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and clear. He explained exactly why he was leaving. Kelly's attempt to dismiss his reaction as being too sensitive was predictable but disappointing. It's a classic deflection technique. When someone calls you out for being disrespectful, you try to make it seem like they're the problem for being bothered by your behavior. The moment Samuel removed his microphone and handed it to the crew member was symbolic. He was literally and figuratively disconnecting from the conversation. He was making it clear that he was done participating in a discussion that had become disrespectful. His statement about the difference between joking and being insulting was spot on. Humor requires context, timing, and mutual understanding. What Kelly said wasn't humorous. It didn't make anyone laugh. It made people uncomfortable. Kelly scrambling to get Samuel to stay revealed her panic. She suddenly realized that she had gone too far and that she was about to lose control of her own show in the most public way possible. The image of Samuel walking off the stage, shoulders squared and head held high, while Kelly stood there alone and speechless, will be remembered for years to come. It was a powerful visual representation of the entire dynamic. The crew's confusion was understandable. They weren't prepared for a guest to walk off in the middle of an interview. So they just kept filming, documenting everything as it unfolded, creating a permanent record of one of the most uncomfortable moments in talk show history. Kelly's attempt to play it off with that forced smile and casual comment about the show going on was painful to watch. She was trying to act like everything was fine, but her body language told a different story. The tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes, the slight tremor in her voice, all of it betrayed her true feelings. The audience's refusal to fully support Kelly in that moment was significant. They could have rallied behind her, could have clapped enthusiastically to help her save face, but they didn't. Their subdued response, the head shaking, the whispered conversations, all of it indicated that they weren't buying what she was selling. Backstage, Samuel's team was rallying around him. They had watched the interview from the monitors, had seen every insult, every dismissive gesture. Samuel's choice not to make an immediate statement was wise. The incident spoke for itself. Meanwhile, Kelly was struggling through the rest of her show. Every segment felt off. Her usual energy and enthusiasm were gone, replaced by a forced cheerfulness that rang hollow. The entire atmosphere of the show had shifted. During that commercial break, Kelly's defensiveness was revealing. Instead of taking responsibility, she was making excuses. She was blaming Samuel for being dramatic rather than acknowledging her own role in creating the situation. She was insisting she had done nothing wrong when everyone around her knew that wasn't true. It was a moment of cognitive dissonance where her perception of events didn't match the reality of what had actually occurred. Her insistence that people needed to lighten up was the wrong take. This wasn't about people being too sensitive. This was about basic respect. Samuel L. Jackson has earned the right to be treated with dignity. He's a legendary actor who has given audiences decades of incredible performances. Suggesting that he should accept being insulted in the name of entertainment is absurd. He doesn't owe anyone that. The fundamental difference between Samuel and Kelly in this situation comes down to self-awareness. Samuel knows who he is. He knows his worth. He knows what he brings to his craft. He doesn't need validation from a talk show host or anyone else. Kelly, on the other hand, seemed to lack that same self-awareness. She didn't understand how her words would be received. She didn't recognize when she had crossed a line. And when confronted with the consequences of her actions, she couldn't admit fault. The lasting impact of this moment extends beyond just these two individuals. It raises important questions about how we treat people in the public eye, how we value experience and wisdom, and how we define acceptable behavior in entertainment. Kelly's comments weren't just about Samuel. They reflected broader attitudes about aging, about relevance, about who gets to decide when someone's career should end. And Samuel's response was a powerful rejection of those attitudes. For other actors watching this unfold, the message was clear. You don't have to accept disrespect just because someone has a platform. You don't have to sit through interviews where you're being belittled or mocked. You have the right to stand up, to speak out, and if necessary, to walk away. Your dignity matters more than any television appearance. The contrast in how Samuel and Kelly conducted themselves throughout this entire ordeal couldn't be starker. Samuel was calm, direct, and principled. He stated his case clearly and then took action based on his values. Kelly was defensive, dismissive, and unable to take responsibility. She tried to minimize Samuel's legitimate concerns and frame herself as the victim when she was actually the aggressor. What makes Samuel's response particularly admirable is that he didn't lose his composure. He didn't yell or curse or make threats. He simply and calmly explained why Kelly's behavior was unacceptable, and then he left. It was a masterclass in maintaining dignity under pressure. He proved that you can stand up for yourself without stooping to someone else's level. You can be firm without being cruel. You can draw boundaries without being dramatic. The audience's role throughout all of this cannot be understated. They were witnesses to something extraordinary. They saw a beloved actor being disrespected. They saw him stand up for himself. They saw a host fail to rise to the occasion, and they made their feelings known through their reactions, their gasps, their silence, their subdued applause. All of it communicated their understanding of what had really happened. In a way, Samuel's walk-off was about more than just one bad interview. It was about setting a standard. It was about showing other people, both in the entertainment industry and beyond, that it's okay to stand up for yourself. It's okay to walk away from a situation where you're not being treated with the respect you deserve. This incident serves as a reminder that fame and success don't protect you from being treated poorly. Samuel L. Jackson is one of the most recognizable and respected actors in the world, and yet he still found himself in a situation where he was being insulted on national television. The difference is that Samuel knew how to respond. He knew his worth, and he wasn't willing to compromise it. The interview became a defining moment for both Samuel and Kelly. For Samuel, it reinforced his reputation as someone who doesn't compromise on self-respect. He showed that even after decades in the industry, he's still someone who knows when to draw the line. For Kelly, the moment became a stark reminder that being a talk show host doesn't give you a free pass to say whatever you want. The whole exchange, from Kelly's initial comment to Samuel's final exit, lasted only a few minutes. But in those few minutes, so much was revealed. It showed the importance of standing up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. And it showed that respect is something that must be given, not demanded. Samuel L. Jackson didn't walk off that stage because he was being dramatic. He didn't do it to cause a scene or to get attention. He did it because he knew his worth, and he wasn't going to let anyone, not even a popular talk show host, make him feel otherwise. It was a moment of strength, of dignity, and of self-respect. And for anyone watching, it was a powerful reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away.